Here
you
we are.
want?
All right, Jeremiah 31.
Yes, I'll share it.
Okay, great. Let's say the bracha, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, v'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. All right, so this is, Jeremiah is known for his use of the metaphor of marriage to describe the relationship between Israel and God. And of course, this passage is typical in that regard. So we're going to read through it quickly and then start talking about these metaphors related to marriage. Can I get somebody who'd be willing to volunteer and read the English?
I will volunteer if you wish.
Okay, great. You're on, Phil.
At that time declares the Lord, I will be God to all the clans of Israel, and they shall be my people. Thus said the Lord, the people escaped from the sword, found favor in the wilderness when Israel was marching homeward. The Lord revealed himself to me of old. Eternal love I conceived for you then. Therefore I continue my grace to you. I will build you firmly again, O maiden Israel. Again you shall take up your timbrels and go forth to the rhythm of the dancers. Again you shall plant vineyards on the hills of Samaria. Men shall plant and live to enjoy them. For the day is coming when watchmen shall proclaim on the heights of Ephraim, come, let us go up to Zion, to the Lord our God. For thus said the Lord, cry out in joy for Jacob, shout at the crossroads of the nations. Sing aloud in praise and say, save, O Lord, your people, the remnant of Israel. I will bring them in from the northland, gather them from the ends of the earth, the blind and the lame among them, those with child and those in labor, in a vast throng they shall return here. They shall come with weeping, and with compassion will I guide them. I will lead them to streams of water, by a level road where they will not stumble. For I am ever a father to Israel. Ephraim is my firstborn.
Okay, I think it continues after that.
I can't
Bill.
see anymore.
Oh,
Here we go.
okay.
Hear the word of the Lord, O nations, and tell it in the isles afar. Say, he who scattered Israel will gather them and will guard them as a shepherd his flock. For the Lord will ransom Jacob, redeem him from one too strong for him. They shall come and shout on the heights of Zion, radiant over the bounty of the Lord, over new grain and wine and oil, and over sheep and cattle. They shall fare like a watered garden. They shall never languish again. Then shall maidens dance gaily, young men and old alike. I will turn their mourning to joy. I will comfort them and cheer them in their grief. I will give the priests their fill of fatness, and my people shall enjoy my full bounty, declares the Lord. Thus said the Lord, a cry is heard in Ramah, wailing, bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children who are gone. Thus said the Lord, restrain your voice from weeping, your eyes from shedding tears. For there is a reward for your labor, declares the Lord. They shall return from the enemy's land. And there is hope for your future, declares the Lord. Your children shall return to their country. I can hear Ephraim lamenting. You have chastened me, and you have chastised me, and I am chastised like a calf that has not been broken. Receive me back, let me return, for you, O Lord, are my God. Now that I have turned back, I am filled with remorse. Now that I am made aware, I strike my thigh. I am ashamed and humiliated, for I bear the disgrace of my youth. Truly, Ephraim is a dear son to me, a child that is dandled. Whenever I have turned against him, my thoughts would dwell on him still. That is why my heart yearns for him. I will receive him back in love, declares the Lord. Erect markers, set up signposts, keep in mind the highway, the road that you traveled. Return, maiden Israel, return to these towns of yours. How long will you waver, O rebellious daughter? For the Lord has created something new on earth. A woman courts a man. Thus said the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, they shall again say this in the land of Judah and in its towns when I restore their fortunes. The Lord bless you, abode of righteousness, O holy mountain. Judah and all its towns alike shall be inhabited by the farmers and such as move about with the flocks. For I will give the thirsty abundant drink and satisfy all who languish. At this I awoke and looked about, and my sleep had been pleasant to me. See, a time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will sow the house of Israel and the house of Judah with seed of men and seed of cattle. And just as I was watchful over them to uproot and to pull down, to overthrow and to destroy and to bring disaster, so I will be watchful over them to build and to plant, declares the Lord. In those days they shall no longer say, parents have eaten sour grapes, and children's teeth are blunted. But everyone shall die for his own sins. Whosoever eats sour grapes, his teeth shall be blunted. See, a time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their fathers when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, a covenant which they broke, though I espoused them, declares the Lord. But such is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after these days, declares the Lord. I will put my teaching into their inmost being and inscribe it upon their hearts. Then I will be their God, and they shall be my people. No longer will they need to teach one another and say to one another, heed the Lord, for all of them, from the least of them to the greatest, shall heed me, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquities and remember their sins no more. Thus said the Lord, who established the sun for light by day, the laws of moon and stars for light by night, who stirs up the sea into roaring waves, whose name is the Lord of hosts. If these laws should ever be annulled by me, declares the Lord, only then would the offspring of Israel cease to be a nation before me for all time. Thus said the Lord, if the heavens above could be measured and the foundations of the earth below could be fathomed, only then would I reject all the offspring of Israel for all that they have done, declares the Lord. See, a time is coming, declares the Lord, when the city shall be rebuilt for the Lord of the tower of Hananel to the corner gate. And the measuring line shall go straight out to the Gareb hill and then turn toward Goah. And the entire valley of the corpses and ashes and all the fields as far as the Wadi Kidron and the corner of the horse gate on the east shall be holy to the Lord. They shall never again be uprooted or overthrown.
Okay, let's stop there. Thank you, Phil. I appreciate it. It was a little bit of an extended section, and you did really well. Okay, so there are a number of very important clues as to the nature of the relationship between God and Israel. The controlling image is the image of the marriage between God and Israel, but there is something different or unusual about this marriage. Did anybody catch it?
The woman asks the man.
Yes, that's the relationship is reversed. It is not what you would normally expect in those days, and probably even still today to some degree. It is not the man who asks the woman, the other way around. In a way, what this begins with is a kind of reversal of the conventional or the natural order of things. That is to say, the relationship between God and Israel doesn't work the way you would normally expect it to be. It works in an opposite sort of direction. This is important to bear in mind because what the prophet is saying all the way through is that the conventional reading of the relationship between God and Israel is that God is, that Israel is on the outs with God, that because of their errors and their sins, the relationship is no longer in effect. And you might think because of the various punishments and so forth that are conventionally understood to be part of this relationship, that that's the case. But the prophet is arguing quite the opposite. The prophet is arguing that the chastisement, so to speak, that Israel experiences in this relationship with God are actually proof of the love of God for Israel and the eternal quality of the relationship. That whatever the vagaries are of the present moment, Israel is exiled or cities are laid waste, whatever may happen, none of that is evidence of the end of the relationship. The relationship persists, and it is that eternal quality that overrides whatever seems to be the case in the moment. Now, this is important to bear in mind because the relationship between husband and wife, as it's described by the prophet, works exactly in this way. The wife or the betrothed appears to be unfaithful, and it is because of this lack of faithfulness that there is this distance, this is punishment, the chastisement between God and Israel. But in actuality, the relationship will be reestablished. Whatever the vagaries are at the moment, whatever the difficulties and the challenges are at the moment, whatever the chastisements might be in the moment, it is the relationship is not ended, it will be reestablished. Somebody was trying to say something. Was that you, Charles? No, okay.
I have a,
Yeah, Kim.
so is this about an analogy? So like man is, God is to man as man is to woman?
In an odd sort of way, yes, but not in the conventional sort of way. The normal order of things when it comes to the relationship between God and Israel is kind of reversed. It's kind of what would not what we would expect. If we were to expect the sort of the normal way things would go, the fact that Israel was unfaithful and didn't keep its relationship with God, didn't keep it to its agreement, that would end the relationship. That would be the end of the marriage, so to speak. The unfaithfulness of Israel would make it impossible for the relationship between God and Israel to continue. But in contradistinction, it's a relationship that persists even though Israel is unfaithful, doesn't keep the laws, doesn't keep the agreements. The flip side of this is that there is a kind of eternal quality to the relationship between God and Israel that is not undone by either Israel's unfaithfulness or the apparent unfaithfulness of God. Israel gets exiled. Israel's cities get laid waste, et cetera, and you would say, well, that would indicate the end of the relationship. But actually, that's not so. The relationship is continually reestablished, even though both sides seem to be incapable of keeping the relationship in consonance with what it ought to be.
In emphasis, doesn't it also say by God that this relationship is over only if and when I say it is?
Yeah, it kind of does say that. And in fact, although that is part of the message, there are elements of this metaphor that indicate that that's not even a possibility. What I have in mind is when the prophet says, if I could measure the depth of the the relationship. It would be like the relationship between God and nature. It is everlasting in that way. So that even though God might be angry with Israel, Israel might be unfaithful to God, even so, there is yet a huge amount of distance that has to be traversed before we get close to the relationship ending. You know, we do this in popular songs all the time. You know, we say, I will love you as long as the stars are up in the sky. I will love you as long as the earth exists.
Until the 12th of never.
Sorry?
Until the 12th of never.
The 12th of never, right? Very good, very good. A song lyrical devotee, such as myself, warms the cockles of my heart. Yeah, we use these kinds of metaphors all the time as a way of describing the eternality of the relationship, despite all appearances. One of the partners might be unfaithful. One of the partners might get angry and so on and so forth. These are all possibilities. And even so, the relationship persists. So this is a description of a relationship between God and Israel that is, for all intents and purposes, eternal. It will last as long as the universe lasts, nature lasts, and so on and so forth. So it is not a covenant or a relationship that is contingent. If Israel is not faithful, that does not put the relationship in jeopardy. Even though you might say, you know, that would be sort of a natural sort of position. You know, I think I mentioned before that there are two covenants that are referred to with regard to the relationship, as a way of describing the relationship between God and Israel. There is the contingent relationship, it's called the Brit Avraham, the covenant of Abraham. There's an agreement. Israel promises to do X, Y, and Z. God promises to do A, B, and C. And as long as Israel does X, Y, and Z, God will do A, B, and C. All right. That is a legitimate way to express this relationship, but it's not the only way to express this relationship. There is Brit David, the covenant of David, which is eternal. It doesn't matter what Israel does. Israel can fail in its obligations to God, and the relationship will continue to exist. You know, this is something we come across all the time in popular literature or popular song, and so on and so forth. We have songs like, he's just my little an ordinary guy. He's got nothing to recommend him. He doesn't do this well. He doesn't do that well. He screws up here. He screws up there. But what can I do? I love him. That's the way it is. From one point of view, even though we screw up all the time as Israel, God continues to love us. Even though, like Ephraim, we may not have, our loyalty may be something that can be questioned, the relationship doesn't break off. This is important to bear in mind, because the criticism from outside is, if you look at the sort of, you know, the day-to-day reality, we would say that God has abandoned Israel. Can we think of any examples that people might point to as evidence that God has abandoned the relationship that God has with Israel? Can you think of anything?
Holocaust.
That would be the number one on my list. Yeah. Or the problem of the existence of evil in a general sort of way, in terms of Israel and in terms of humanity.
Anti-Semitism today.
Yeah, Sid, that's a good example. Anti-Semitism. How can that exist? And nonetheless, the relationship between God and Israel persists. It persists despite all sorts of negative contradistinction, whether it's the Holocaust or anti-Semitism or exclusion and marginalization that Israel experiences. All these things, you would say, well, these are all evidences of God's disfavor with Israel. These are all signs of how the relationship has ceased to exist. It's been broken, and it's been broken irreparably. But as it turns out, according to the prophet, that's not so. So for him, Jeremiah says the relationship between God and Israel is like a marriage, even though there are things that one partner in the relationship may do or not do, which you would say that in and of itself would put the kibosh on the relationship. Turns out, not so much. It turns out that the relationship persists despite all the negative behavior on both sides. So this is point number one.
Can I ask something?
Yeah, Kim.
So sometimes we talk about the male and female parts of God or aspects of God,
Yes,
or appearances
okay.
of God, and it seems like we associate female with non-conditional love, and male with conditional. This is kind of like two aspects of God. You know, I'll only love you if you do this, and I'll love you no matter what.
Well, I think that what I'm trying to express here, and I don't think I'm going to try to be more clear about it, is that both elements are part of the relationship between God and Israel. There is this contingent part, okay? The part where it's possible for Israel to behave in a certain way that would end the relationship. And
But
yet,
also, we don't associate, when bad things happen,
yeah,
we don't associate that necessarily with our behavior.
say more. I'm not sure I understand.
Well,
exactly.
some people said 9/11 was because people weren't doing the right thing in their lives, that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
All right.
Or
Well,
you could say the Holocaust, or any of these, or
all of these examples of evil or of fissures or breaks in the relationship, they all could conceivably be signs that the relationship is over. And yet, the relationship can persist even so. It is, for example, in everyday life, is it possible that a husband or a wife could be unfaithful to their partner and yet remain married? That happens all the time. Other times, not so much. Other times, the relationship cannot bear such unfaithfulness. But what the prophet is saying is that in the relationship between God and Israel, and I think what you can say in a larger sense between God and humankind, the breaches in the relationship do not necessarily mean that the relationship ends. That in and of itself is a very profound sort of statement about what it is to be in relationship with the cosmos or with God or whatever it may be on the part of human beings. Not that we have license to do whatever, but that there are behaviors that we could engage in that could lead to the rupture of a relationship, but they don't necessarily have to. The relationship could persist even so. Now,
wait, I think Ellen wants to talk.
yeah, Ellen, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand. I apologize.
No, that's all right. So this is, leads to some discomfort. Where is this giving Israel a pass for evil behavior, like their own evil behavior? And like I was working with some students, and we were talking about women praying at the wall, and somebody was offering that that some people, throw chairs and, seriously injure people women who are trying to pray at the wall. So does that give a pass to people who are behaving really bad? And, there's worse things that, that Israel has done, the state of Israel.
Yes.
But, yeah.
Well, all right, first of all, as I know that you are aware, because we've had conversations of greater or shorter duration, we are making a distinction always between Israel, that is to say, the people that is in relationship with God, as opposed to the state of Israel, not Yisrael, the government or the national political entity, which is something else entirely. They're sometimes it's the same people, but the relationship is different.
So I just conflated the two in my two examples.
Exactly, and I wanted to be clear about that. What we're talking about here in this this prophecy is Am Yisrael, the people Israel, not Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, having said that, we could engage in a very profound and fruitful discussion about what are the differences between the two. When are we in one ballpark? When are we in the other ballpark? That's all legitimate kind of question to have. But that's not what we are in here. And here's the proof of the pudding. This vision that Jeremiah has about the ongoing relationship, the one that cannot be ruptured, where is that description? Where does he come across this understanding or this vision?
I think Stan wanted to say something.
Oh, I'm sorry, Stan. Go ahead. You're on.
Rabbi, going back to the word Israel, it seems to me in verse 27, Jeremiah changes the definition of Israel. See, a time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will fill the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Is he there not talking about the two kingdoms?
That is a good point, and this is a reference to the two kingdoms. That is true, but the larger theological point is not isn't affected by that. I mean, in the sense that yes, there is the different relationship between God and the northern kingdom called Israel, as opposed to Judea, which is the southern kingdom. They are both, in a larger sense, Israel, even though the northern kingdom has a name, Israel. It's like Washington, D.C. and the state of Washington. We always have to say the state of Washington because we don't want people to be confused that we're talking about the District of Columbia. But we can talk about both as being Washington. We do this also as a literary kind of gambit. It's called metonymy. We say Washington issued a statement, X, Y, and Z. Well, first of all, we don't mean George Washington. Secondly, we don't necessarily mean even an identifiable institution. When we say Washington in that sense, we're talking, it's where the part stands for the whole. What we really mean when we say Washington in that way is we're talking about the United States. We're talking about the people as a whole, but we say Washington. In the same way that we say the White House issued a statement. Well, the White House didn't issue a statement. The White House is a building. But what we mean is that the White House, which represents the government, issued a statement. Okay, so when we're talking about Israel here, we're talking about both the northern kingdom of Israel, and we're talking about Israel, the people, the entity that includes both the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. Am I being clear?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, good. Right. Nobody said anything. I wasn't sure. Okay.
Yeah, no. No, I just wanted to point it out because I thought he was being just a little more explicit here, saying that when I say Am Yisrael, I'm not only talking about the remnant from Judah or Judea that went into Babylon, but also the one that left that was destroyed 122 years prior to that.
721, according to most historians, as opposed to 586. Yeah, so roughly 150 years. Yeah, these are both entities that have their own, if I can say this, their own integrity, their own identity, and so on and so forth. And together, they constitute Israel as an Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. But they have their own separate histories. Okay, but here's where I want to go with this for a second, Stan, because I don't want to lose sight of this particular statement. The idea is what I was asking was, where did the prophet come up with this idea that despite the lack of faithfulness on the part of Israel, for example, that the relationship between God and Israel, speaking now of Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, where does he get this idea that this is something that cannot be ruptured? How does this occur to him? It's very easy to miss. He had a dream. He woke up from this dream and had this realization that this is the nature of the relationship between God and Israel. This is not something that he comes up with because he's a political theorist or anything of the sort. He's not even a theologian. He has a dream in which he dreams that the relationship between God and the people of Israel is unbreakable. It cannot be reached, cannot be destroyed. It will persist despite all appearances. This is sorry? Somebody was going to say something?
I was just going to say, but isn't that reflected earlier in Torah, for example, when God says the rainbow will be the sign of the covenant, but doesn't God say this will be a covenant for all time, that I will never again destroy the earth in a flood?
That's true, but God is not addressing Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. He's addressing Noah and Noah's descendants. That's a universal statement. It's about the idea that the presence or evil doesn't destroy the creation. Okay, so it's a little bit of a different point. Okay.
Yeah, well, that was the only one I could remember that had the specific phrase for a covenant for all time.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fair enough. It's a good point. And I think that what we can say is this idea of the eternality of the covenant that exists between God and humankind is also a quality that exists in the covenant between God and Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. So what that means is that Israel might be exiled. Israel might be damaged. It might lose territory. There are all sorts of terrible things that could happen, but ultimately they will return, and the integrity of the relationship between God and Israel and the land and so forth will be reestablished, regardless of whatever other apparent fissures there might be. This is an important argument because the general view of the nations around is that these fissures indicate that the relationship between God and Israel has been abrogated. It has ended. It is no longer in effect. And by the way, this is not something that happened just in the days of the prophet. Can we think of a not exactly a modern example, but a more recent example of that? The answer is the emergence of Christianity, which are the church fathers argue that the destruction of the temple is a sign of the disfavor that the Am Yisrael, that the people of Israel have in God's view, and that the relationship has ended and needs to be replaced by a Brit Chadasha, a new covenant. That's where that idea comes from. And it happens again and again and again in our history. So the position of the prophet is, despite appearances, despite the conventional view, despite the everyday interpretation of events, the relationship between God and Israel persists, even when it doesn't look like it is. So you can have terrible things that happen. The Holocaust being, a signal example. The Holocaust does not necessarily mean that the relationship between God and Israel has ended. In fact, the argument that the prophet here is making is that it's quite the opposite. That the existence or the persistence of a gap, a discontinuity between the position of God and the position of Israel in this relationship doesn't show that the relationship is over. It shows the relationship actually is in effect. This is a kind of paradoxical view, but one which, from the standpoint of Judaism, makes a huge amount of sense. Why? What does it mean when we say that Israel, the people Israel, is subject to whatever correction or chastisement and so on and so forth exists? Are these things all signs that the relationship has ended?
I think Wynn wanted to say something.
Oh, Wynn, you're on.
Yeah, the quick question, if like in a breach in a human relationship implies that in order to stay in the relationship, you have to forgive. So that when Israel breaches the relationship, they seek forgiveness from God. But what about when God appears to breach the relationship? What happens?
What happens is that ultimately the balance is restored. The exiles are brought back, for example. The former relationship of integrity is reestablished.
But do we say that God breached the relationship?
Well, that's an interesting question. And the answer, well, I don't know what we say, but I think that's the whole point of being critical of the relationship from the standpoint of Israel. How do we evaluate what it is that God does or doesn't do in terms of the relationship, not just with Israel, but of ourselves as individuals or of humankind?
I mean, that was some of the arguments surrounding the Holocaust, wasn't it?
Well, sure, that is a signal example. So the question that comes to mind, of course, is what does it signify that that something like the Holocaust occurs? Is that a sign that the relationship doesn't exist anymore? Or is it, oddly enough, a sign that it persists despite appearances, despite what we might otherwise be inclined to argue? So I think it's Jeremiah's position that the relationship between God and humankind, God and Israel and so forth, is like the relationship between a husband and a wife in the following way, that even though there is conflict, and even though this conflict may be inevitable, may be impossible to avoid, that doesn't mean that the relationship is necessarily at an end. On the contrary, the existence of the conflict is evidence that the relationship is still in effect. Otherwise, what are we talking about? the idea that God and Israel have a troubled up and down kind of relationship, no, all right, that's the way it is. That's the way life is. That's the way the relationship is between all entities that have profound linkages one to the other. It is impossible to avoid the experience that from time to time one feels that the relationship is lost, or it has fallen into such disrepair and such problematic qualities that we give up. from a practical point of view, we say it's over. And when we do that, as individual human beings in the world of husbands and wives, what happens? Divorce, exactly. When we think that the breach or breaches in our relationship with our spouse are of such magnitude or such persistence that they are more than just profound, they are essential, then we might be inclined to give up and say, okay, we have to get a divorce. And many, many people feel that way at one time or another. The question is, do you have faith? Do you accept the possibility that the relationship might be reestablished at some point in the future? If you don't think that's a possibility, then divorce is the answer. But if there's a part of you that thinks that the relationship could be reestablished by whatever modifications in behavior or what have you, then you persist in the relationship, even though in the immediate circumstance, it might be unhappy, it might be a problem, it might not be fulfilling, et cetera, et cetera. It's when that hope of restoration is gone that the relationship is actually over.
It's interesting to me that God is taking the traditional Jewish viewpoint that he can divorce us, but we can't divorce him.
Well, there's a limit to what God can do here, because God defines under what conditions it is possible for God to issue a divorce. Yeah, at the point at which we could theoretically plumb the depth of creation and come up with exactly how deep it is and so on and so forth. At that point, we might be able to say, okay, the relationship is over. But that we don't ever reach that point. Even God doesn't reach that point.
I think Sidel has a question, and also
Okay,
Stan.
Well, a thought came to mind is that a lot of the Holocaust survivors never again accepted God. They divorced God.
Some of them did, yes.
Yeah, for good reason, I think.
Totally understandable. You could certainly understand why some would feel that way. I will also point out, Sid, that there is a very powerful literature about the persistence of others in saying that or experiencing that the relationship between God and Israel continues to exist despite all of these contraindications.
And also Stan had a question.
I think that comes from having a blind faith.
Well,
there is a God.
I can understand that point of view. I don't think, from my point of view, it's not about blind faith. It's about whether or not there is hope in the future. You know, if you, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm thinking in terms of current Orthodox position on divorce. If we continue the analogy that God is the husband and Am Yisrael is the wife.
Okay.
The wife in modern Orthodoxy cannot get a divorce unless the husband agrees to it through the mechanism of a get. So Israel, if that analogy holds, Am Yisrael can never divorce God unless God permits it.
That is an interesting question, Stan, and I think that the answer is that it comes from the question of who has status, who is in a position to act. And what I mean by that is that we're not talking about liberal Jewish theology and so forth, but in general, more traditional views, the relationship between the husband and the wife is established by the action of the husband from the beginning. Why? Because the wife has no legal standing. it's another way in which there is a patriarchy, I guess, within the traditional Jewish point of view. Men can establish the relationship and they can end the relationship. Having said that, it's also not that women have no role to play. But it is not, how do I put it? We're talking about divorce now. It is, it's a less active, a less upfront kind of role, even though it's very important. The husband can initiate divorce proceedings in Jewish law, but if the wife does not accept the divorce, doesn't accept the get, it doesn't happen. So, and the way a get is issued, you're probably aware of this. The husband might, go to the rabbinical court and ask for a get to be issued, and then the get has to be relayed to the wife. If she doesn't accept it, then it is not in effect, even though theoretically it is. I don't know if that's being clear or not. It's like
I didn't realize that. I thought it was the other way around.
No, the wife gets to accept it or not. It's like a subpoena in American law. A subpoena can be issued. There is a person who has to receive the subpoena. The subpoena has to be served. If it isn't served, then it doesn't have force yet. Now, it doesn't mean that the subpoena hasn't been issued. Doesn't mean that the court doesn't have a point of view about it. It does. But it has to be communicated. It's also why, for example, from a positive point of view, that when you get married and a ketubah, a marriage contract is issued, who keeps the ketubah?
I would say the wife.
It's true. It's the wife. It belongs to the wife. Even though it's the husband who signs, the wife doesn't sign. Why? Because it is a relationship that, I know it's time to stop. I got it. I was watching. The relationship persists or doesn't persist, even though the husband might, act to issue the divorce. It requires, nonetheless, two to tango. So that's an example of how this works out. In the Jewish law, as I've remarked many times, is a certain way, except when it's not. So this is a good example. All right, we need to stop here for today.
Okay, well, what's the reading for next week?
Yeah, I was just about to look that up. Kim, hang on.
Here, I'll show the list.
Here we go. Thank you. All right.
Social justice and the prophets.
Well, I think we already kind of did that, didn't we?
No, I'm just showing the whole list.
Yeah, but we were told to read this today.
Yeah.
Right, Jim?
Right.
Jeremiah 31 was for today.
Right. Social justice and the prophets. Hang on, let me look and see what that is.
That was an extra one, I think.
Well, maybe so.
No, that was for another week, unless I mistakenly.
I think you're right, Kim.
It's a good one for this week or next week, considering what's happening in the world today.
Sid,
How do you mean, Sid?
we discussed that before you and Chuck joined the group.
Oh.
That was the first or second week that we discussed that.
Yeah, that was pretty early on. We have Isaiah 53, already did that. Hang on, we did the Valley of Dry Bones. I think we did Micah already, Micah 4. Okay. Prophets, social justice. I'm trying to figure out how to open this. I can't open this text.
You're not seeing it on the screen?
No, I see it on the screen. I see the link on the screen. I'm trying to open the link.
Oh, you can't open it from mine.
Okay. Well, then that.
But I can open it.
Okay.
If you tell me what number.
It on the list that I'm looking at, it is number 7, social justice and the prophets.
So you already did that.
Yeah, we read that already.
Yeah, I think we did.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So we got there's something else on here that we need to look at. Hang on. Let's see. This is getting very confusing. I can't scroll this. What am I doing?
I can scroll it.
Oh, okay. All right, let me take a look at this one. I think this is
What number?
number 20. Okay. And this is not about a specific text. Hang on.
You want me to go back?
I think so for right now, yeah. This is about the terminology for that's used to apply to prophets. Hang on. Jeremiah 31. We did the suffering servant already, right? Of course we did. Can we open 12, Kim?
We did. I think we did this, or we did a lot with.
Yeah,
Martin Luther
I have
King.
a theme speech, yeah. Okay,
Just
we
a second.
have Micah 4, which we already did. Okay.
Oops.
Was today our 6th meeting?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. It's really hard to do if I can't scroll it, Kim.
Just a second.
Yeah. All right. Well, I see. All right. So this is correct. The reading from Amos. Okay, it's 5:24. The justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never failing stream. I think that's the one we need to be looking at.
Okay, but should I find it in Safaria?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Okay. Are we good?
Okay, great, great.
All right. Thank you all very much.